Hello and welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast, where it's not about getting the gig, it's about enjoying the gig. I'm your host, Tanner Guss, and I'm back after a few weeks off. I've decided to not let this podcast get in the way of my own well-being, and I was a bit overwhelmed and realized that I didn't have enough time to practice. So took a few weeks off to hit the shed, grow, get my priorities straight, and I'm excited to be back sharing new stuff. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who's been listening and supporting the show so far. We've been played in over 30 countries now. We've cracked the top 50 music interview podcasts at certain points. And it means so much to me that people are getting something out of this. Especially want to thank those of you who are leaving ratings and reviews. It honestly is the easiest and most effective way to help the podcast grow and reach new audiences. And in honor of that, I'd like to start reading a review every week. And this first one is from Jog134:5:663, which is a killer username. And it says, as a musician, this podcast is exactly what I needed to hear. It's so easy to get overconsumed by all the pitfalls of this industry, so it's great to have someone talk about how to stay sane through it all and maintain a love for your craft. That's what we're all about, and I'm glad you're getting exactly that, Jog134:5:663. Okay, into this week's episode. This week, I'm sharing the wise words of international touring and recording jazz artist and guitarist Corey Christiansen. Corey is a great person and a killer musician. He records for Origin Records. He teaches at Utah State University in Logan, Utah. And he's performed and recorded with a lot of heavyweights, including James Moody, Jeff Coffin, Terry Lynn Carrington, Terry Ongoli, Eric Alexander, Jeff Hamilton, Randy Brecker, Peter Erskine, Willie Aikens, Dr. Lonnie Smith, Christian McBride, and many, many more. I once saw him air guitaring on Rufus Reed's Cane at a Gen Con conference, so it's safe to say that he's the real deal. This episode is titled Utah Ex-Patriots because, well, Corey came up with the name, but it's this idea of leaving your home community because for whatever reason you don't have access to the thing that you love, the thing that gets you up in the morning, whatever it is that you want to dedicate yourself to. In this case for Corey was Black American music, and there isn't a lot of that in Utah, if we're being honest, and he decided to leave to go get closer to the source and learn more about it. And now, after several years getting destroyed on the road and learning and growing, he's come back to Utah, and he's able to still have that part of his life, but also share everything that he's learned with a smaller scene like Utah. And I think that's so cool. And I think it's important for people in these communities to hear the perspective of someone who's been outside and seen how things work in the rest of the world. And I'm excited to share his thoughts about that with you all. So Corey says this right off the bat, and I want to reiterate that there are a ton of great musicians in Utah who I really admire as people and players and who are doing great things. And this certainly shouldn't take away from any of the work that they're doing. I also don't think that this episode is really about Utah. I think it's more about anyone out there who feels frustrated because they're in a scene that doesn't have a lot of the music that they're trying to play, how they could change that situation, whether it's going and finding that or just how to best support and grow that kind of music in the scene that they're in right now. In addition to all that, Corey talks about what music school can and can't do for you. He talks about what it means to be, in air quotes, a real jazz musician. And he shares some cool pro tips on travel and gig etiquette. As you'll hear, Corey is so passionate about Black American music and how it's taught and the effect it can have on people. And it's great to hear how it's changed him, not just as a musician, but affected how he lives his life in all aspects. And I really think you'll get a lot out of this. I know I did. And that's all I got. So without further ado, please help me welcome Corey Christiansen. Corey Christiansen, welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tanner. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this is very exciting, and I'm happy to share your thoughts on here. What I'm most interested in getting into is your perspective on something that is probably seen in a lot of communities in the country, but from our point of view, we've seen this in Utah, and it's just kind of about setting the stage for building and maintaining a healthy scene for jazz music, social music, Black American music, what have you. And I think most of us would agree that you're, if not the most established, one of the most established musicians of that genre right now in Utah, at least in the sense that you're touring and teaching internationally, and you've played with a lot of heavyweights, and have, as you've put it before, spent lots of nights getting destroyed on the bandstand. And because of that position, when you bring up certain points about the scene, people seem to take notice. And hopefully today we can talk about some of those things that you've pointed out and offer some healthy actions that we can take as a community to address those. And to get into it all, start the same way that you chose to start your latest Facebook post that turned into a bit of a theater to follow. But you said that most people who don't like jazz do so because they've heard it played poorly at weddings.
Man, you're being very kind, because I don't think I said poorly. but that's very nice. But okay, so let me back up. This post was kind of inspired by I guess some other comments that I've seen on social media, but also in person, in the Utah scene. And for people who aren't familiar with the music scene in Utah, there's some great music happening in Utah. There really is, because of its geographical area location in the mountains. There's a lot of resorts, right, and that draws a lot of people to come here for things like beautiful weddings, conventions, and so there's we've got the whole Sundance thing. So there's a huge amount of work for people who are doing pop music, cover band music, just popular society music, and that's great. And there are a lot of jazz musicians, I guess, or musicians that also play jazz, that they get hired to play in those bands. And many of us know that when you study jazz at a university, you learn how to transcribe, you learn how to learn a lot of music quickly. I mean, these are characteristics that anybody running a corporate band is going to find very appealing, and it's definitely an asset, to have those skills. I guess where I was kind of what kind of made me take notice of this, though, is there were some musicians in that circle that were really dissing people that like jazz and people that play jazz, and making fun of some of the jazz repertoire. And so I did that, make that comment, which I stand by to this day. Everybody I know that doesn't like jazz doesn't like it because they've heard it played really poorly, usually at a wedding, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Because I have taken friends of mine that are non-musicians, and they're intelligent people, but maybe think that they don't like jazz because of maybe hearing it played poorly, or maybe just having a limited exposure. But I've taken them to see some of the greatest musicians playing some of the most complex music. And I'll give you an example. I took a friend of mine one time to see Dave Liebman's group. Yeah. Right? And now Dave Liebman's group is not, there's nothing about that would work at a wedding, right? Right? I mean, at the typical wedding. I mean, it would work at my wedding. I'd be like, yeah, man, get down. Go for it. And it was an amazing evening. I mean, my friend Vic Juris was in the band, and Marco was playing drums. And, I mean, it was his band that he had for years and years and years. Marchenko, and it was so beautiful, right? And my friend walked out of there, and I said, So what did you think of that? Because that's heavy listening for a lot of musicians, you know. And he said something that was very powerful to me. He goes, I don't know how to explain it. He said, because obviously I don't understand it, you know, as a musician. But he said, I felt like I witnessed truth tonight. And I was like, yeah, what do you mean by that? You know, and he's like, well, he said, I just feel that there are some things that are, and, you know, like, you know, he voiced it like on a infinite or like eternal level. There are things that are just true, and like they're great or they're not great, right? And he's like, this was one of those moments where I was like, I feel like I witnessed truth, that these guys have taken their craft to such a level where it was undeniable, you know, or it would be undeniable to be in that room and not say, I witnessed greatness, right? And that kind of had a profound effect on me in the sense of like what our responsibility of musicians is, you know, as a, you know, and I don't know what term we should use, because, you know, I mean, we all say jazz, but that means so many things. I really do like the term Black American music, because if we play Latin music, we say Latin, you know, music. Like if it's music that was, you know, kind of innovated and created by people from Latin America, I mean, that's what we say. But let's make it even broader. Let's say just improvised American music, right?
Okay.
There's a responsibility for us. I think those of us that have decided to play this music, that there's a responsibility for us to always put the music and present it at the highest level possible, right? And because there is that responsibility, I think we have to be honest about maybe what those levels are, you know, for ourselves. But for me being a teacher, also, you know, maybe in a mentoring role, to be very honest about what those levels are.
When you say levels, there being the idea that as musicians, we're all important, but in our ability to perform the art, there are different standards that need to be met.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's good that you put it that way, because I think everybody is important, and everybody has, you know, things that they can say that is unique, you know, with a musical voice. But when you start talking about being a jazz musician, or, you know, an improvised music, you know, musician, or, you know, Black American music musician, you know, there are just some things that are kind of expected, you know. And I've kind of gone on record before of saying there's a huge difference between being a musician that plays some jazz music and being a jazz musician. And that's not up for me to say, you know, who those people are or what the criteria is. But I think it's good to ask that question to yourself if you're trying to be a jazz musician, you know, like, am I really being a jazz musician, or am I, you know, is the bulk of what I'm doing, you know, like other types of music, and then I will do the occasional cocktail hour at a wedding as my jazz outlet. I mean, you know, and I would be inclined to say if that's what you're doing, you're probably not really being a jazz musician.
And well, I think you've also gone on record saying that you're not really sure if you're a jazz musician.
Yeah, I'm not. I record for a jazz label, you know, Origin Records, and I have like, you know, 6 or 7 records out, you know, with them, and you know, previously some other records out that are, I guess people would, you know, probably categorize as jazz, but you know, my last outings, you know, I'm not sure that they would be, you know, something that would traditionally be called jazz. They're definitely, you know, rooted in like, you know, Black American music tradition, and they're definitely, you know, based on, you know, a model of improvised music. But as far as just, you know, really truly being a straight ahead jazz musician, I know those guys, that are, and I'm not sure I'm one of them. I mean, it's, and somebody told me one time, they said, well, sounds like you're making being a jazz musician a really elite club. And I'm like, I guess I am, I mean, I think it is. I think that it is an elite club. I studied a lot of classical music, in my undergrad, and I played classical guitar for several years, but I'm not a classical guitarist. I have stolen some ideas from my classical training, but I'm certainly not a classical musician.
Well, do you think part of the situation is that you are at an age where you're influenced by a lot of music that came after historically, while still being Black American music? It's furthering of what we might call traditional jazz or bebop and those foundational elements of it. And because of all these new influences, is it that maybe the art that you're putting out and your contemporaries and even younger musicians than themselves are still creating music in that vein, but the title, does it maybe not even exist anymore in that sense?
Yeah, well, and I think maybe what we're trying to hint at is that there's elements of that type of music that just aren't socially relevant anymore, right? I mean, like, I hate to say it, but I was talking to somebody about this, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. These are my thoughts as of today, but that it used to be. Well, okay, I'll give you a little anecdote here. I went to this store with my wife, and of all things, it was a fabric store, not the kind of place I'm usually hanging out, right? And it was run by an older couple, I guess, maybe like a generation older than me. And, in the store, they were playing all like pop music from the 60s, right? And I got to say, man, like everything had a bounce. Like every tune like had some element of like swing. And it wasn't like swinging in, the pop tunes weren't swinging in the sense of like, like the Count Basie Orchestra, but like every beat and every like chord groove and every one of them like had a bounce to it. They were playing, there was some doo-wop music and, like, I guess like late 50s, pop music, but also, a lot of tunes. And I was just like, dang, man, everything had a bounce. And now it's very rare that anything that it would be considered popular music has a bounce to it, that it has some kind of, it's just not triplet based music, it's straight. And again, it's like, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm never going to go on, saying that, swinging is a greater thing than, straight eighth music for the world. It is for me. I like music. I mean, that's what resonates with me. But I grew up in a time where, there was a lot of music that came, during my lifetime that was post bebop that that I kind of grew up with and was socially relevant. But there was also, I was really tethered to an older tradition of music because from age 13 was like, I started playing Wyoming bars, like, classic rock and Beatles and Stones tunes and stuff. But like I was 13 years old playing Wyoming bars and with older musicians, guys that were so much older than me. And I always had this kind of, I guess, gateway, even in the popular music gigs I was playing, I had this gateway to an older tradition. And I'm not sure that exists the same way that it did for me, anymore.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of this situation. And I know, particularly in a place where there aren't that many opportunities to perform live Black American music, like Utah, there can be a lot of conflict and frustration for people. Younger musicians who are wanting to play what is maybe most culturally relevant to their generation right now.
Sure.
But the only venues they have available to them are most frequented by guests of generations older than that, who that music probably isn't going to be as appealing and isn't culturally relevant to them per se. And there's also just the fact that after a certain age, like it's scientifically proven that people are much less likely to want to hear new things. And in a place like Utah, where there's only a few places to do this, and we need to preserve them and give them as good of a fighting chance as they can, it's a tall order to then introduce musics that have a long road ahead of them to be well received.
Yeah, I think you bring up kind of a couple of interesting points. I mean, like, one thing you said I think was really important is that, there are only a few places like in a city the size of Salt Lake, and I think this is probably kind of true in other areas also. It's just not only, the city of Salt Lake that deals with this, but, cities of this size.
Yeah.
That, there is a limited number of places to play. And you said we need to preserve them. And I'm like, oh, absolutely. And preserve the culture around it, and sometimes, that whatever that means. I mean, I know that, at the end of the day, club owners are kind of like, well, look, I need something that will put, bums in seats and that people will order, food to and order drinks. And I totally understand and I respect that. But I go back to my original, kind of anecdote about taking my friend to see Dave Liebman's group is that, those places will be preserved as long as the music that is presented there is always high. If the level is high, there's an audience for it. And, I guess that's what kind of got me so vocal talking about some of these issues also is, when I would hear fellow musicians kind of diss the genre, when I know good and well that, they make at least a little bit of their living trying to play that genre in a certain way, I do take offense because I really don't do any other, kinds of gigs like cover bands or whatever. I mean, I'm playing improvised art music all the time. And it's like, it sends a message out that I think doesn't do my industry, if you want to put it that way, or my art any service to bad talk it. It almost like it makes other people think that it's okay to talk about this thing that I find really beautiful, in a negative way. And I feel like, for right or wrong, I feel like there's a certain amount of defense I owe the genre, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But, going to your, back to your point, yeah, I think that there are, I think there are certain leanings that, people have for their listening or whatever they grew up around or whatever was popular or whatever they're familiar with. But I just hold so strong to the fact, or not the fact, but my opinion that people will respect even, a music that might not be socially relevant to them now, but if it's played at such a high level that when they witness it, they can't deny that it was great.
I like that.
I mean, and I guess that's why, just as a performing musician, but also as an educator, I get kind of passionate about this because I'm like, this is not a casual thing that we've been at, that we've decided to do. Not for me, it's not. There's a lot of responsibility that's put on our shoulders. I mean, we have accepted the task, as somebody trying to play Black American music, or not even trying, let's just say playing it, to play it at the highest level so that we don't lose the audience. Because what we're really doing is we're preserving one of the most beautiful things that has come out of out of American culture, and frankly, out of an ugly mess that, our forefathers kind of created with oppression and segregation and all these things. It's amazing that this beautiful thing came out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So So for me, to take it lightly is disrespectful.
Yeah.
You know, it's disrespectful to a genre of music. It's disrespectful to an entire, you know, group of people that did not have things easy, you know, and yet even amidst all that, this beautiful art form comes out of that. So I don't take it lightly. I guess because maybe it's because I love the music and I love the people that I know that create this music so much. It's like I owe it to the music and the culture of the music to play it as well as humanly possible for me. You know, not humanly possible. I mean, that would be, you know, somebody other than me. But I owe it to the music to do the best I can and to show the music some respect.
I love all that. And I guess that kind of brings me to the precipice between two big ideas that I have. And one is this idea that I like to champion the act of growing music at a small town level. You know, people gaining an appreciation and understanding of Black American music, and maybe they don't go on to become world-class at it, but they take it back to their community and introduce other people to it. And it's like a grassroots approach to growing the music scene all over the country through bringing what information you have back to your community. And
yeah, totally.
I think that is one thing that comes from a ever-growing thing right now of jazz education in schools. And you just have masses and masses of students like myself who go through these programs. And at least for me, it was very important because I don't think I really had access to in Utah the resources to understand or just to grow up hearing and playing Black American music.
Right.
And so a school can really help you get there quickly.
Yeah, it can. And here's the thing. I mean, while jazz education is growing everywhere, you know, Tanner, you kind of did what I did, which was you realized that there weren't enough answers in your current zip code.
Right.
So you left, which takes great effort, you know, and a lot of, you know, hope and a lot of optimism to be like, I'm going to remove myself from the situation I'm in. I'm going to go to a different location so that I can get other, you know, and probably safe to say deeper and more close to the source answers.
Right.
Right. And because of that, there was a great sacrifice that's made, you know, and people that make sacrifice usually hold things a little bit closer. Right. And, you know, going back to why I'm kind of passionate about, I mean, I guess some people will say, well, you know, you've been calling out a lot of things that have been going on in Utah. And I guess I have, I don't think about it that way, but I guess I have. But yeah, because those of us that are trying to do this on a high level have really given up a lot of other things that people haven't had to sacrifice. You know, I live in a great neighborhood, and there's a lot of successful people around me, and they've been able to make a really, really good living without sacrificing in the same way I have. You know, and I see that. I mean, anybody that went to music school knows that, like, if you were a jazz major at a school, you put in more time than somebody that lived in your apartment building that was going into, like, business administration.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not the same time commitment. It's just not, you know? And because of that, it's like, yeah, look, man, we have sweat for this thing. You know, we have really put ourselves in uncomfortable situations and put ourselves in a very personal way in a very vulnerable situations where people will critique and you know, and sometimes, you know, even ridicule, I guess, you know, what we're doing. There's just not a lot of professions that go through it. I guess actors go through that, but, like, you know, like hell, like an architect doesn't go through that the same way we do, like.
Yeah. Well, and I think that in a way answers.
Like, I mean, think about this. Like how many people have you ever heard? Have you ever heard they're like got in a real like that are just normal people, right? That have gotten into a debate like whether Frank Lloyd Wright knew what he was doing or not. Mm-hmm. like a great architect, but yet like it's going on right now. There's people that are like you hear rumors of people that are like dissing Oscar Peterson, and that's like I'm like. And whatever, I think that's actually valid too. I mean, people they're entitled to their opinions, but people, there's so many people I think that dabble in music at a young age that are just they become very confused about maybe how much they know, and so they become critical. And social media is a great place for people to just voice, their opinions. I mean, back in the day, you only had a few people whose opinions would ever be read by anybody because, you had to be a critic in a magazine. But and geez, back in the old, the original like downbeats and stuff. I mean, there was probably an argument that the critics were even a little bit more savvy than they are now. I don't know. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that, but it would believe that. But everybody's an expert now, and music's just something that's around us all the time. So we picked this thing to do, with our lives, and to make it our livelihood. That takes tremendous sacrifice, and we put ourselves out there in a way that other professions, like really don't. And so, I guess, I think it's important for us, for some of us, to like dig our heels in a little bit, and when people are critical of it, is maybe giving a little, I don't want to say pushback, but maybe providing another perspective, rather than being silent.
Right. I think perspective is really important there. And what I guess I was getting at is, in order to, I think, best serve your community, you do need to gain that perspective. And It sounds like you might agree with my thoughts at the moment that, at least in a place like Utah, it is very hard to gain that perspective, because there's a lot of people in similar communities like this where you grew up in the community, and if you haven't left and experienced cultures where there's a long history and established culture of Black American music, now it's just interesting to me, I guess, to see people arguing on Facebook about what is and isn't jazz when they haven't lived in other places. And I think an important thing would be to just, even if it's just visiting these places as often as you can, like once a year you go to a different scene just to go soak up the music and see how things are and be inspired and have a new idea of the depth of everything, would be really important, because then you could bring all that back to your community with that new perspective.
Well, I agree 100% with what you're saying there. And it's interesting that like we agree with each other and we both followed a very similar path, right? Like grew up in Utah and then went away to get a better perspective.
Yeah, I guess we could summarize the whole interview as, get out and explore, but we'll try to go deeper.
well, totally. Yeah. Or you could title it the Utah Ex-Patriots, I mean, like,
I'm going to now.
That's awesome. But it's, I came back, to Utah. I actually didn't think necessarily I was going to stay here. I mean, I just was going to regroup. I mean, that whole story would be a whole other podcast. I mean, it'd take way too much time for me to tell you kind of what happened, what my thinking was. But I was living in St. Louis at the time, and it was great. I was just on the road all the time, and so and my wife and I had kids, so we wanted to regroup, and I wanted to change up my career a little bit. So we moved, back to Utah. And long story short, we ended up staying. But you kind of touched on something where it's like it's hard to get that perspective. Well, I think it is, and and it's interesting, right? Because there's more information available to people today than there ever has been. And like when I came up, the internet wasn't even, it wasn't even a thing. And so no, you weren't getting ideas, like pumped into your house. Like you really had to go like find somebody, and get answers right from the source, or maybe somebody had written a book and then you'd, try and track the book down or order it, to be shipped to your house through a publisher like it. But it took some effort. And I even had it way easier than the generation before me. But one thing that I did, Tanner, that I was glad that I did is when I had opportunities to perform, I hired older musicians to be in my band. And there was a lot of reasons I did that. But the most selfish one was that it's like, I want the lessons, and even if it means that, like, to get a better musician in my band and an older musician and the gig pay sucks, I might forego my share of the money, or some of it anyway, to like make it worth, and a more seasoned player to come here, because I'm actually kind of getting a lesson and I'm getting mentored, And I mean, to me, it wasn't any different than like taking a lesson. And also I was like, man, some of these guys that have got a lot more experience than me are so, they're so savvy about what to do on a gig. So even if it was a society gig and it's like I'm playing for somebody's wedding, like, I remember one time I was like, oh my gosh, the bride's mom is freaking out. And I was like 18 years old, and I was leading this band that was, trying to play some jazz, music for this wedding. And I had a very seasoned player, that was one of my professors in the band. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. I mean, I didn't tell him this, like but I was like, I did ask him, what do I do? He's like, and those old guys are like, I've seen this a million times, and like we got through the gig and it was cool. Like everything was fine. But if it would have just been me, oh my goodness, I mean, I could have ruined the whole reception. And and had a big blowout with the mom and the bride, who was a friend of mine. I mean, it just could have been a lot worse. But for some reason, I had it instilled in me somehow that, for decades, I hired older musicians to always be in my band. And one thing I got to say that I do see, and I think it's important also, that when if you're a younger musician and you get a gig, it's great to play with your colleagues and your contemporaries. But there's something to say for putting somebody who's got a lot more, like miles on them, to put them in the band with the understanding that you are going to learn from them. Not that you're going to be their boss, but like you're going to learn from them. And, I've done that, Tanner, I've done that my whole career. I mean, even as recently as my last album, I was really the most, because I hired Michael Spiro, who's a dear friend of mine, to co-produce my record, because I wanted to do, an entire record of music that was, heavily based in Afro-Cuban music, because I was really trying to just develop my own sense of feel and time. And I figured like going back as close to the roots of some of that music to Africa that I could go would be great. And, I have this great friend, that Michael Spiro, who's a real expert in this field. And, my name's on the record, but gosh, there's probably an argument that it's Mike Spiro's record in a way, because like he had so much more experience that I hired him to be my guide. And, technically I was probably the boss because I'm cutting the checks, but there were times in the studio when Michael told me, he's like, look, shut up and let me fix your record.
That sounds like him.
It does. I mean, if you know him, he's the most beautiful guy in the world. I mean, he's really one of my dearest friends, but like, I recognize I have a deficiency. So I'm gonna go to my network of people, and I'm going to like put people in my life that are going to give me the kind of experience I need to grow. And again, it comes back to, because I have so much respect and like a passion and love for the music, that I want to honor it in the most deepest way I can.
I like that a lot. And Corey, I think it's really cool that it seems like throughout your whole career, this kind of goes back into one of the things we started the conversation on, is just this idea of identity. And I think some people in their careers or whatever make a distinction that okay, I'm a professional, I'm there, I know what's up, I gotta own it. And maybe that's helpful for people in the sense of having confidence and grounding that you're a professional. But it sounds like you got that same security through instead letting go of the idea that you were going to make it or be there or be a jazz musician. And you accepted this idea of growth, that you were just on the path, and that everything that you were doing, you were going to put yourselves in situations where you could grow, even if it meant you were going to be embarrassed or overwhelmed or not be the best musician in the room.
Yeah, I think you're, I think I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm kind of stumbling here because I had about 10 thoughts, while you were talking, but it is, I like to think about it this way. If you're a musician, you're probably never going to get to if you're really truly concerned about honoring the music and giving the music everything you've got, the fact is you're probably never, ever going to stop learning, right? You're going to be progressing for your entire life. Hopefully you'll be progressing. And, so I always ask my students, I'm like, because they say, well, I want to do what you're doing. And I'm like, cool. Let me ask you this then. And this isn't, I'm like, do you like to travel? And everybody always says, oh yeah, I love to travel. I'm like, no. Let me clarify. Do you like to travel? I'm not asking, do you like to be someplace else? Do you like the process of traveling? And because I love to travel. I actually love the process now. And I love getting in my car and knowing, okay, I get to drive, 9 hours to the next gig. I'm going to see so many cool things on the way, and I'm going to have to solve problems on the way. And that's that can be rewarding in its own way also, right? I'm going to have to, potentially deal with a flat tire, or I'm going to have to deal with this or that, and I'm going to have to leave, with enough time to do this and that. And you have to think about it. I love the process. I love going to the airport. I really do, man. I mean, it's yes, I see things are a drag, but, for some people, but, almost 100% of the time, I kind of like the challenge of traveling. And everybody, we all complain about the airlines and stuff, but I get such a sense of satisfaction when it's I did it. I got my guitar on the airplane. That was awesome. And I'm and the way I did it wasn't something that a rookie was going to be able to do. I did it because I had a lot of experience, talking to flight attendants. And I knew what to say to them, and I knew how to act, and I knew, and it's
can you share that information now?
Well, the short of it is, I just always be really, really kind and try and accommodate them. If they ask, is there anybody that is willing to check their bags? I'm like, I'll check all my bags, man. But can I please keep the guitar? And they'll always, 100% of the time so far, they've always been we are going to do everything we can. Thank you for volunteering to check your other bag. It's solid. I think also that's a very improvised music kind of approach too, right? Where it was I had to give a little to get something. We do that in music all the time. It's we kind of have to give so that you can get. And, I try and carry the principles I've learned from this music over into absolutely every aspect of my life, Tanner. Because it comes back to what my friend said, right? If there's things that are just innately true, if they work on a bandstand, they're going to work at the airport.
And
they're going to work on the freeway.
Yeah.
And they're going to work when I'm over at my friend's house at a party. And like, they're just going to work. Like if they're true principles, then they'll work. And I guess that's part of the joy of being a musician of the kind of music we are, is because like, oh my goodness, there's so much freedom in the music we play, and we get to make so many decisions on our own that we get to learn all the time, and we become, I think, better people. If I've said this a million times, I'm like, look, if the UN had, if it was required for everybody before they start their UN meeting to play a couple choruses of blues together, the world would be in a lot better place, because it doesn't matter where you're from or what your politics are or what your religion is or any of that stuff. When you play a blues with somebody else who can play a blues, you're kind of friends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a thing, and so I go back to it, I'm like, there's a depth to this music that our society today seems to poke fun of, that actually is what makes it beautiful. And I'm just done letting people talk trash about it without me saying something, like being the other voice. But the thing I was going to say too is that I just think it's important for students of this kind of music to understand that it's fantastic that you go to school and you get a degree. I think it's really important. But kind of nobody cares whether somebody has a degree or not. I mean, and I guess my point is, like, you just went, you graduated from IU, right?
Yeah.
And you got to study with two of the greatest percussionists, in my opinion, in the world, and two of the greatest percussionist educators in the world, in Steve Houghton and Michael Spiro. These guys are brilliant performers. They're brilliant educators also. But neither of them have a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They got to where they are by having so much experience with so many great people that were, frankly, at the time they were in their development years, they were just so much better than them. So a degree is really great, but I've talked about this before, but the degree is kind of this ticket to the dance, right?
Yeah,
it's
I like that a lot.
When you get a degree, at a good school, or you're studied with somebody who was like kind of knows what they're doing and has their game together, you've got good information. And that's the ticket to the dance. I mean, it's like now you get to show up and be with the other dancers. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you've started dancing yet, or that maybe even you're a great dancer, right? But like there was a certain thing that like paid your wage to get into the dance. And now you get to try and dance. And man, the best way to learn how to dance is have a dance partner that knows how to dance, right? Or have a group of people that you're with that know how to dance. And that's really the information that you get in a degree, I think, is, while it's a beautiful thing, it's not necessarily the sign that you've arrived, but it's the sign that you are willing to go the distance so that you can arrive. And I truly feel like, I got a great degree. I studied with some amazing people. I went to the University of South Florida. I studied with Jack Peterson, who was the guy that started the guitar program at Berkeley in Boston, like in the 60s, right? And then he moved back to Texas, and he started the program at North Texas, guitar program. He was just always like the man that seemed to be creating these amazing places for guitar players to study. And it just so happened that, I went there for him, but I got to study with Chuck Owen, who has an amazing big band and is an incredible, really amazing writer, and was, one of the people that formed that International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers. He has a whole Center for Composition and Arranging down at USF. And Jack Wilkins. I studied with some really, really great guys. I got my degree, and I moved to St. Louis and started playing with this guy that used to paint houses for a living, but he played saxophone, named Willie Akins. And let me tell you, man, Willie Aikens was the real deal, and Willie was this like incredible mentor to so many young musicians. He was kind of like the Art Blakey of the Midwest. And, he took me under his wing in his band, and, there were so many amazing musicians that came out of that, out of that mentoring. There's the piano player that had been there, before me, Simon, he's running the San Francisco Conservatory jazz program now. And I always see him at these Gen conventions, and Simon and I talk, we talk about these, our times with Willie Aikens, and like how much he taught us how to swing, and how much he taught us how to like show up with the music for a gig, and how to program the music, and how to sequence the music, and present a program that like takes your listeners on a journey. And it was those kind of experiences where I was like, oh, okay, so all of my degree learning skills really set me up to learn from somebody who's really doing this, on an extremely high level. And it was because I was in his band a lot, that I met a lot of national touring acts, because they would come through to play, the club in St. Louis Air Jazz at the Bistro. But all the cats that were in the know knew that, like, if I'm in town, I got to go hear Willie Aikens play, because he's got the sound, man. Like, he's got that old Blue Note sound. And, I met some great people down there. And, it truly was, it was like, I kind of felt like my degree was really, 6 years of school or whatever it was, I don't know. I took a little longer than most people, but, it was several years of work that was all put into place so that I could actually end up learning effectively from people like Willie Aikens, and Vic Juris, who was one of my greatest mentors, and Danny Gottlieb, who was in my first band. And, that degree, as cool as it was really just the entry fee.
Yeah. Well, that's so awesome to hear all of that. And I think that's such an important realization to make. And maybe what makes it hardest to swallow is that when music conservatories and music schools at universities decided that a college degree, which in most professions is, you're like, okay, I'm systemically prepared and confirmed to be ready to be this thing. Like, right. I'm ready for the job.
I'm an accountant now.
Right.
I have a piece of paper that says it.
Yeah, that's how most degrees work. And so when jazz education became institutionalized and people were getting these degrees, there's just that culturally built-in idea, and this is something I've had to explain to my parents, that just because the jazz education system, by and large, not always, but has moved towards this higher education model, doesn't mean that the underlying principle of mentorship and serving your dues on the road went away. It's just given people who didn't grow up where that was an option an opportunity to make up for it in a very intense and scary 4-6 years or whatever, and then try to go do that thing.
Yeah.
Which is just, I think, sounds weird, and it's not what you would expect from a college degree, but it's still a great opportunity, and viewing it like that is just, I don't know, realistic.
Well, the thing is, I think that there are huge benefits from learning the way the music was originally learned, which is you were in a band and you learned from a mentor, right? Or you were in a city where there was a scene and you would go and you would sit in, and then during the day you would practice with other musicians, and like you really lived it. And I think that's not gone, but it's less prevalent than it used to be. I know that with my generation, it was probably less than the generation before me, and I see that the generation below me has it less than me. And I think that is, there's just things that you learn in that way that are just profound. But I also, as a professor, see that there are some real tremendous benefits to learning, also in the academic kind of way. I don't profess. Funny I choose that word, but profess to that like it, that the other is not needed anymore. It's quite the opposite. It's probably it's needed just as much or more to kind of counterbalance. But they're both pathways that yield a lot of great benefits, mm-hmm. right? And so what I've tried to do as an educator now is really, use my experience as a working musician to enhance the academic experience. And, I'll give you an example of that in a second, but it's, I think it's important that I say that, like, I am not one of the college professors that went to school and, immediately got a job in a school after I got a master's or a doctorate or whatever. Like, I spent a good decade of just, being on the road 6-7 months out of the year. And, you kind of quoted me as saying, getting destroyed on the bandstand, which was true. And it was by my own design. I mean, I just always hired people that I knew I was like, oh man, this guy's going to destroy me, or, this person is just going to kick my butt tonight, and it's going to be awesome. Or, we're going to go on the road. I've got a tour lined up, with a few gigs in an area, and it's just, I'm going to hire the people that I know are just going to, I'll be bleeding at the end of the night, and how awesome, because I'll come back stronger. Mm. But one of the things that we did try to do, well, didn't try, we did it in Salt Lake was, I saw a need, for, to bring, I guess, a different type of education that I had to the younger musicians in the Salt Lake area. And so, I kind of had this idea, and I bounced it off David Halliday, who's a great, tenor player in Salt Lake. And we formed this project, which was called the Halliday Christiansen Mentoring Project. And we made a deal with the club, maybe the only listening room in Salt Lake, the Rabbit Hole, to let us put a band together of at least 3, sometimes 4 younger musicians who had just graduated from school or were in their senior year to, audition for our band. We held auditions, and we would pick 3 or 4 people, and then we would have a 6-month run at the club where we would play once a month. And then at the end of the night of each gig, when we would assign, the band, like, okay, tonight's going to be, the focus is going to be like the music of, Thelonious Monk, or it's going to be the bebop era, or it's going to be soul jazz, or whatever the topic was going to be. And we'd play 3 sets, and then we'd sit around for 45 minutes to an hour, and we would talk about, like, what went well and what needed to be better from our perspective as professional, musicians. And, it was a pretty cool project. We did 2 years. So we had 4, different versions of this group across 2 years that all did 6 months of work. And, Tanner, I got to say, for the most part, I mean, the people that went through that, kind of process, I feel like they really did grow in 6 months in ways they wouldn't have been able to they wouldn't have been able to grow the same way in an academic setting. Mm. And it was simple things like, the club would give all the musicians a meal, and like the first month I asked the young guys, I'm like, how many of you tipped your waitress on your free meal? And, it's like crickets. Nobody was tipping the waitress on the free meal. And I'm like, okay, but let me explain to you. I always tip on the full amount of the meal or more, because one, I just got a free meal. Two, that person is trying to make a living just the same as us, in a challenging environment. And I'm like, and I just think it's the right thing to do to reward their efforts, even though they're bringing us free food. I should be tipping. And I said, but it goes a little deeper than that. I said, sometimes the person, the bartender or the waiter or waitress, they might be pretty good friends on the side with the club owner. That might be why they're working there. They like, it becomes kind of a social thing. Like, hey, these are all my friends work here. My friend owns this, so we all do this together. Well, if they talk good about the band, chances are that gets back to the club owner. You'll hold that gig down for a longer amount of time. And then you think about it the opposite. How many times has the wait staff or the bartending staff not like the band, and all of a sudden that band loses the gig?
Yeah.
Right? So I'm like, there were some things like, I'm not sure how you teach that in an academic setting other than just saying it, right? But like for them to really see it and then to start to think about like developing a relationship with the people that you're working with, which, they might not just be musicians. The people you're working with is the security guard. The person that you're working with is the bartender. The person that you're working with is the events coordinator. The person that you're working with is the director of an art program, or is the CFO of a concert hall. I mean, there goes to be many levels of this, right?
Yeah.
Because I really think that, and I've said this a bunch of times, that like there's a lot of people that are involved with keeping this music alive, and it's not just the musicians. So the more that we can do to, one, present the music at the highest level possible, and two, to have other people have a good experience interacting with us, that's how we keep the music alive.
Yeah, no, I love all that. And one of the things that jumped out to me was how cool it might be, because this model that you did with the How to Christiansen project was so cool, and how you set it up with a structure of set material, and they actually had time to learn it, whereas I feel like in school you don't necessarily you get so much stuff thrown at you, and in this scenario, you had a month to get the music together, and then you got to present it not on a concert hall stage for other students. You were at an actual club. It was a real gig. And then you got structured feedback. And that seems like a great union between the academic world and the professional world. And the thought that came to my mind was how cool it would be if your combo that you took in a university was set up like that, where instead of having your performances at the school, you could set up some kind of partnership with a local restaurant or bar or something, and you have regular performances there where you get to present the music.
Mm-hmm. We actually do that at Utah State. We have a formal agreement. It's once a month with a venue that typically holds like rock bands and singer-songwriters, but and it's a nice venue. Mm-hmm. And they come through, but we have the students, play once a month. We actually do all of our jazz combo performances off campus.
Awesome. Yeah.
We do them in an actual venue.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool. And and the other thing is that I should point out, there are some restrictions that we have as educators that sometimes, that you don't have when you're just running a band at a club, right? I mean, like if I have to give a musician, some really pointed feedback, in a really, really serious way that might be, hard to digest at a club, I don't really have to worry about that musician going and talking to my department head and saying that I'm a bad teacher.
Ooh, I hadn't considered this aspect.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, anybody that's been through that mentoring project, if you talk to them, they probably say, they're like, yeah, these guys were very direct and, and not mean, because like, look, man, I'm happy. If you're here, if somebody's in my, in a band that I'm mentoring like that, and you auditioned, you went to the struggle to audition, and you came out and you want to get better at this, and I can tell that you're trying, man, you are either my sister or my brother, but because of such, I owe you some honesty, and, Tanner, I had so many, I get emails, like every 6 months, from somebody who's been through the group, and they're like, thank you for this. Man, you gave me the business. You were so straight with me in a way that I haven't experienced in an academic setting yet, and it was really helpful, right? And that's the thing I think, like a lot of younger musicians need to understand is that, I think there are exceptions, but for the most part, if somebody's, very direct about what the deficiencies are, it's two things. It's one, the music is really important. We love it. It deserves to be respected. If you play really poorly on a tune or on a style of music, it's kind of like somebody disrespecting a family member a little bit. I mean, not like, it doesn't make you want to fight, but, it's like, ooh, yeah, I need to address this so that this doesn't happen again. But then the flip side of that is that most of us are like, have respect for anybody that's decided to do this, because I was there. I was that freshman that was clueless, for a long time, and like, oh, I don't really get what's going on, and I know how hard that is, right? So I get it, I know what students are going through, but I also would not trade any of the, direct conversations that I've had with older mentors that made me love the music even more.
That's also awesome.
And I guess that's where I'm still at. Like I said, man, I just did this record of all this Afro-Cuban stuff, and man, I had Spiral come out a couple months before the recording session. He was in Utah, and I got us a gig, so that it worked out nicely. But we spent a whole afternoon. He was looking at my music, and he was like, "Oh, this melody doesn't work with clave at all. What were you thinking?" Like, gah, let me show you. But then he was like, and that was the thing. It was like, let me show you. And then and now it was like, thank you. Thank you for the understanding. That's what I wanted. And what a beautiful thing. But what I explain to a lot of time to the younger musicians and those that are in an area, or like just because of the geography of the city, are actually, they're just frankly kind of isolated, from what might really be going on. It's just that I'm like, you have to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice to get to a certain level of this music. You have to give up things. That might be that you have to give up the pay for one of your gigs to get somebody better than you on the gig so that you learn. It might be that you have to give up some money to take a flight for a weekend to go to a different city to take one or two lessons from some people that have a perspective that's more broad than yours. It's those kinds of things. I think sometimes people in isolated areas think, well, this is so great. I can get all the information I need because I can see people play on YouTube, and there's so many lessons on YouTube, and there's so many online things. It's like it's not the same. And I'll tell you why it's not the same. It's not the same because the sacrifice wasn't the same. So the information hits you in a different way. You know? I mean, think about it, Tanner. If you'd have stayed in Utah and you would have had, Steve Houghton come out to you and give you lessons, once a month or whatever for several years, it wouldn't be the same.
Right.
Or if you took an online course and you didn't get to interact with Steve Houghton, on a daily basis, but it was like, yeah, all the information's there. He can show you how to hold the drumstick. He can show you, like how to play, a groove that he played with Freddie Hubbard or whatever. It's different when you're in the room with him. He's like, oh, this is what I did with Freddie Hubbard.
Yeah. Well, and it's a connection to that energy.
Totally.
You can feel their connection with the music and resonate with their passion.
And I guess I get passionate about it, when I discuss this stuff and some of the things you've read, because I'm like, I have felt that joy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm befuddled why some of the rest of you don't want to feel that joy.
Mm.
And I guess part of that is because like part of that joy is having somebody call you out when you're not doing it right. And then you go practice it and you get it right. And it feels better than you thought it was going to. I got to tell you, man, one of my greatest professional mentors was Vic Juris, and he just died about a month ago, right? He died of liver cancer, and it's been this really, really, sad thing for a lot of us. And, but in his time here, oh my gosh, he mentored so many people. It was unbelievable. But, I was one of them. And so I lived in St. Louis and he lived in New Jersey. And, but I wanted to learn from him. So, man, I hired him to be in my band. We had a 2 and at one point 3 guitar band with bass and drums. And we toured all over the place. We played gigs. It was a blast. And, in the mornings, and we did a record. We had a #1 record on the Jazz Week chart for 3 weeks. And we were getting reviewed in all the magazines. We had ads in all the magazines from the record label. It was kind of a fun time, but none of that compared to this, which was the morning after every gig, Vic would meet me for breakfast and we would sit down and we would talk about the music and he would tell me like what he thought I could do better, and it was awesome.
That sounds awesome.
Because you get out of school and sometimes it's hard to find people that will tell you, because, it's like, whatever, you sound fine, blah, 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 blah. Like, there's nobody owes you anything. They don't owe you, some kind of, critique to make you better. They don't owe it to you. But Vic was so generous about like, here's something to think about, and all of these things were just pearls to me, and they were in context too, because like we just played, like a concert hall for 90 minutes. And, he's like, okay, well, on paper, whatever, maybe this wouldn't be a big deal, but you remember how this felt at this moment in the night? And, do you remember this or that? And, I was like, yeah, well, this is how you fix that, and well, by the way, it's going to take you 18 months to like, really get this. But I got to tell you, one of the greatest things that, happened to me on the bandstand also was Vic. And it was, I had just played and I can't even remember what we were playing, but we were playing some songbook tune. I can't remember with the band. Danny Gottlieb was on drums. I can't remember who was on bass, but it was a great band. And I had just taken my solo, and it was Vic's turn to solo, and so I was kind of coming back off the stage a little bit because I'd step forward, and he was stepping forward, and he walked past me, and he says into my ear, and up to that point in my life, it was probably the most well-constructed solo that I'd played. Like, it felt good. Like, everything felt good. It was like, that's what it feels like,
Okay.
And all this work is paid off. And Vic walks past me and says in my ear, "Nice try." And it was great because what he was really saying is, "Hey man, it's starting to click." It's starting to click. And I know enough of those, guys from that era to know that that's the biggest compliment he could have given me.
Mm.
Can you dig?
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing so much great stuff. I think it's all really powerful, and I just have maybe one more question for you. And
Sure.
you said, well, this is a quote from one of your posts, and you said, "You won't make much money playing jazz. We know that, but playing it and even listening on a deep level will provide you a deeper sense of self." And I'm just curious if you can elaborate on that a little bit more.
Well, I have to be a little bit careful too when I say things like that, because I don't ever want to seem ungrateful, because the business has actually been really good to me. I enjoy a very nice lifestyle, due to and I owe it to, Black American music. I do. And my mentors. So just to clarify, what I probably should have said is, it's going to be difficult to make a lot of money, in this genre, but it's possible. You can. I know people that have carved out great, financial lives for themselves, but financial success isn't the only type of success, and even if somebody studies this music and doesn't go on to be a professional at it, there are lessons you learn in studying this music that do. You will have a better sense of self. And let me give you an example, or maybe I'll even answer your question, in a Socratean, I guess, kind of way by asking you a question. Do you think that by deeply listening and practicing this music that you started to understand a few things about yourself when you were in school?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely it's still an ongoing thing, but it helped me connect so many dots.
It does, right? And one of those things is just this realization for me. I can put myself in a room for 4 hours and do something that I'm not good at yet.
Yeah.
But that's a huge thing, because not everybody has that, right? And, even if you don't, you can learn it, and you could learn it other ways. I think you can learn those kinds of things with sports, and, and you can learn it. But music is a beautiful gateway. It's one of the ways that you can learn that. Now, when I say deeply listening, and you can find a deeper sense of self, the more I know about this music, the more educated of a listener I am, right? And I think one of the things that it's taught me is that I'm the type of person, really deeply listening to this music is, I'm the type of person who really does appreciate beauty. And that acknowledgement, I guess, is carried over into, every facet of my life. Now that I'm a little bit conscious of it, it almost gives me a confidence to love things in a different way than I don't think I would if I didn't have such an appreciation for the music. I was just in New Orleans, right, where I saw you, and I was walking around the town, a lot of different areas of the town, and the music was great, of course. I appreciated that, but I appreciated the architecture in a way that I never have before. I've been to New Orleans several times, but I attribute that back to being, learning how to be a good listener. It was a very similar, I guess, skill set maybe, or maybe, I've practiced at listening, and that's carried over, into appreciating some other things. If your listening becomes a priority, I think other things become a priority too. Because it's an underlying philosophy in my life. There's only so many hours in my life, and so what I want to do is I really want to fill those hours with the most beautiful with the most beautiful music I can find, and beautiful on an intellectual level, that could be possible. Beautiful, in a just purely sonic way. Beautiful. Sometimes I'll put records on that, maybe maybe music isn't the most intellectually stimulating thing, but I listen and I'm like, wow, the way they recorded the guitar and the way they recorded the drums on this album is like it's so great. Like, I can appreciate the beauty in a sonic way also, right? But I think that philosophy or that sense of self of who I am is really carried over into other things. Like, okay, if there's only a certain amount of, time, and I'm trying to fill that time with the best music, well, I also want to do that with food, right? And I want to do that with relationships. And I want to do that with art, the visual aspect of my life, and experiences that I might be having. That whole thing with how I structure my life is I owe it all to listening to good music and learning how to appreciate a high level of music.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all this, Corey. I really appreciate it. One last thing.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. Before we're done, if you want, you can put them in the plug zone and let them know about where they can find you online, upcoming shows or runs you have going on, anything you want people to be aware of. You're welcome to let them know.
Sure. Oh, thanks. Well, I think the easiest way to find me is probably on my website, which is CoreyChristiansen.com. Chances are if you just type in, if somebody Googles Corey and jazz guitar, I think I'll show up at some point there, which is good for me. And then social media. My musician Facebook page, of course, has unlimited amount of friends I can have. I think my personal page is pretty much full right now, but also on Instagram, and I am Corey _guitar. So anyway, that's how I can be found.
Cool. Thanks, Corey.
Hey,
appreciate everything.
Great hanging out with you, Tanner. Good luck. I know you got a gig. I think you got a gig either tonight or tomorrow night. So
yeah, I do need to run right now, so I'm gonna let you go. Appreciate it all.
Okay, see you, Tanner.
See ya. That does it for this week's episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast. The feature track this week is off of Corey's most recent record, La Proxima, and it's Street Cred. You can find links to that record where you can purchase it, along with everything else we talked about in this show and additional commentary on the actionable advice Corey shared at our website, thehappymusicians.com. You can also stay up to date by following us on social media at The Happy Musicians and subscribing to the show. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope you'll help us keep spreading this message of positivity by telling your friends, and we hope that you'll join us again next week. Thank you so much, and stay happy.